Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
But you also had people that were very fine people. Very fine people on both sides.
And the aliens would mind meld and give them the technology. They're bad aliens. So are you surprised the Nazis were influenced by demons?
No, if demons are real, I would definitely think they'd be on the side of the Nazis.
Yeah.
McDonald's is connected to the Clintons. They chop up the bodies and put them into the sausage and hamburgers. People are being cannibalized. Look it up.
And I'm watching CNN talk about this as violent white nationalist protests. We have done everything in our power to keep this peaceful, you know?
It's Pepe's become kind of a symbol.
Welcome to Yeah Nah Pasaran, a show about fascism and its gravediggers. I'm Cam Smith.
I'm Andy Fleming.
And this week we are joined by Rachel Withers, who is the co-host of The Spin Cycle on Triple R and one of our most astute observers of the body politic. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Oh, thank you for that kind introduction.
I guess just to begin with, the topic that's on everybody's lips, the stage 3 tax cuts. what can we say about them?
People just can't stop talking about it. Labor can't stop talking about it. The media can't. No, obviously there's very much not the story of the day with what's happened to Fatima Payman in the last week, 2 weeks really now. Yeah, it's been horrifying, really, watching first what went on with her not quite being expelled from Labor, but more or less finding that she was uninvited from the caucus if she wasn't able to keep silent on certain issues. And then watching in the last few days the media just tear her down and spread Islamophobic rumours and backgrounding from Labor sources suggesting she might not be a citizen. It's just been horrific.
It's all very mean girls. You can't sit with us anymore. But do you think that Senator Payman is the next Pauline Hanson?
Well, Peter Hartcher certainly thinks so. I mean, that was probably the low point of all of this. Peter Hartcher writing a column on Saturday morning asking that very question and suggesting that Fatima Payman was engaging in identity politics, which was really more or less the same thing as what Pauline Hanson does, when, of course, Fatima Payman has left Labor over the fact that she wants to be able to speak out against a genocide.
It's a pretty silly thesis, I think, and I hope most would agree, but do you think it also indicates a certain degree of panic in the ranks about this Payman taking the position that she did?
Oh, certainly. I mean, it has shown up all the various Labor left MPs who have been telling their constituents, especially sort of, those in Western Sydney and the northern suburbs of Melbourne, that they can't possibly do anything about this, that they're, advocating for this. And then to see this young first-term senator kind of show them all up by crossing the floor and then leaving the party with a, I thought, quite moving press conference in which you could see how torn she was as someone who spent her life, well, much of her adult life in the Labor Party, and felt that to uphold her Labor values and to speak for her constituents and to speak for her conscience, she couldn't be in there anymore. So I think, yeah, she has really shown that potentially Labor's rules and their hardline solidarity and their refusal on certain issues to actually openly advocate for people in Gaza have really been shown to be a bit of a problem in the 21st century.
And also to adhere to the national platform of the Labor Party. She wasn't really departing from what are meant to be core values.
No, it does say in the platform, which the party membership, the rank and file, sort of get to vote on. It's a national conference is its own beast of democracy. But ultimately that is how the members of the party decide what the platform of the party is. And the most recent platform says that if in government, Labor will, and this was, I think, since 2019 or so it's been in the platform. I'd have to check that. But it says that a Labor government would treat recognising Palestine, the state of Palestine, as a priority. And so that is the position of the party. It's just that the caucus, which is all the members of parliament, takes precedence over that and decides when and how to implement the will of the national platform. And they had decided, no, now is not the time to recognise the state of Palestine, even though 146 countries around the world already do. And I believe France is about to, potentially.
It's also a great Labor tradition to call people rats when they depart from the party line. And also, it's probably a great Labor tradition to try and destroy people who go against them, which is what we've seen with all of this citizenship talk. It seems tone deaf and a bit cack-handed.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to especially the citizenship question, it's partly ridiculous because Labor are the ones who pre-selected her and got legal advice at the time showing that she was eligible to sit in Parliament, or that the fact that she had made every possible effort to give up any potential Afghan citizenship she might have had, having arrived as a refugee, mind you, and with the Taliban currently in control, she has made every effort. And so that particular piece of backgrounding and gossip, I feel, was kind of embarrassing for Labor. And, I think we saw most government ministers kind of deny or say they had no idea where that came from when they were questioned about that. But it really is panicky is how it looks. There's a great piece from my Spin Cycle co-host, Charlie Lewis, on Crikey today, going through all the different things that have been said about her by Labor sources across the media. And just, she's either painted as the most scheming, shrewd, calculated political operative, or a pawn of the radical Muslim community and the Greens. It's not, none of the backgrounding is particularly consistent. It's just mudslinging.
We've also, for the first time in its history, religion intrude into the parliament. What do you make of that, shocking development, Rachel?
We're heavy on the sarcasm in this show, aren't we?
No, not really.
We've seen in the last few days, I think really led by the Prime Minister, this suggestion that it's not in the Muslim community's interest to in any way organise or pursue their values and through the political system, because there is a few grassroots groups mobilising to sort of challenge the Labor MPs who take their votes for granted and who aren't speaking up for the people of Palestine. But we've seen the Prime Minister suggesting that is somehow not in their interests to be pushing for someone to actually listen to them. Meanwhile, you've had, various different Christian political parties over the years. We've seen very dominant Catholic factions of the Labor Party, which were the reason we couldn't have marriage equality for so many years, and the reason Labor has conscience votes on issues like abortion. So it seems those groups are allowed to mobilise and organise without being told by people like Anthony Albanese that it's not in their interests to do so. And we saw quite a horrible exchange, I would say, on Insiders on the weekend, where Phil Coury from the AFR basically made similar points to the Prime Minister. They're going to isolate themselves. They're going to create a right-wing backlash. And, when pushed on this idea that we've had plenty of Christian movements, he sort of just shrugged it off. He's like, well, that's the reality. People are not going to like hearing a group with the name the Muslim vote, as if they should just not be allowed to, because Australia is, as Amy Ramikas pointed out, so xenophobic.
The other thing that occurs to me in this, on a slightly more serious, in a different tone, I suppose, I guess it's not the case that concern over the genocide is confined to Muslims in Australia. Many communities are mobilising, taking to the streets, taking other forms of action to try and convince the government to take a more proactive approach to the question of mass murder. That's one consideration. The other is, do you think that it seems to me that the kinds of fears that are being expressed about votes being lost to other candidates, whether they're who take a different position or are more outspoken about the issue, is quite real. So there is something very much at stake for the Labor Party in attempting to respond to isolate figures like Payman and exclude the question of what's going on from, as best they're able, from the political agenda.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we've just seen last week with the UK election, there were similar groups mobilising against the Labor Party with a U in the UK, and it was also called the Muslim vote, much like one of the groups here, which was suggesting alternative independent candidates to vote for. They weren't running as the Muslim vote candidate. They were just candidates who were challenging sitting Labor MPs who hadn't been vocal enough. And that movement saw 5 of its endorsed candidates get up and beat Labor candidates. One of those being Jeremy Corbyn. It wasn't just Muslim candidates they were endorsing. It was Jeremy Corbyn, who ran as an independent in his seat. And so, yeah, it is definitely a worry for the Labor Party, especially in 2 particular seats, I'd say. Tony Burke's seat of Watson and Jason Clare's seat of Blaxland, both in Western Sydney, both with very large Muslim populations, not unlike the seats that fell in the UK. But, by trying to isolate figures like Payman and belittling this movement and questioning whether, suggesting that the movement is going against its own interests, it seems like Labor is actually only building more anger against it and only, mobilising the community even more to want to say, and again, not just the Muslim community, but like other groups who may also be part of this mobilisation, but many people saying, no, you can't take these areas and these seats for granted just because they've always been Labor seats.
Speaking of the UK election, Labor with a U have gotten up with a landslide, though some might say it was a bit of a Bradbury effort after years and years of incompetence and corruption. Do you think that Labor without a U can take some lessons from this? Well, they might have set the course there with their own election.
I think they did. I think they're taking lessons from us.
Yeah. It seems like a difficult strategy to replicate from government.
Oh, in terms of
benefiting from the incompetence of the incumbent.
Well, I mean, yeah, we'll see what happens. Our Labor can no longer bank on being not Scott Morrison at the next election. Certainly, I would say that the UK election has huge parallels in terms of, it could have been any Labor Party that got up. It was just that people had enough of the Conservatives. And in both cases, you've seen Labor go from being having quite a progressive platform, which I think we could say Labor did have here in Australia in 2016 and 2019. And then at the point that people are really sick of the Conservatives, running with a small target strategy, running with not very progressive policies, and then going, yeah, look, see, we have to be a small target, when it wasn't necessarily the fact they were a small target that saw them get up, but just the fact that it was that it's time factor, and it wasn't it's time for Labor, it's time for not the other guys. And so, yeah, I think there is a risk of both Labors taking the wrong lesson from these elections and thinking they shouldn't be brave and they shouldn't be bold because, there's plenty of sort of left-wing groups growing as well. Labor here and in the UK won with the very, very small shares of the vote. Both voting systems meant that they got majorities, but, with minor parties and especially those on the left on the rise, will our Labor see a majority next time around? I'm not so sure.
You're listening to Yerna Pesseran on 3CR, 8:55 AM, 3cr.org.au and 3CR Digital on your DAB radio. We're currently talking to Rachel Withers about that ever-interesting topic of Australian politics. Now let's get back to Rachel. We've also seen the French elections were earlier this week. As we record, just this morning, turned out that the far right were seen off by a vote splitting pact between the left and Macron. Do you think that any lessons are going to be taken from that? It seems like that's the sort of thing that we're not going to get any lessons from.
I really wish we would learn some lessons from that. I suppose in the French example, you know, they were facing a fascist kind of far-right grouping that looked like it had some serious numbers behind it, especially after the first round where it looked like they were probably going to secure a majority. And it does feel a bit like, you know, Macron's kind of centrist group fell in line with the far left alliance that had built up, you know, to see off the far right. I like to think that, I mean, we're already sort of heading there, but if we had a serious far right threat in Australia that Labor and the Greens and other left-wing movements could contemplate working together. But at present, the amount of animosity between Labor and the Greens, where Labor seems to treat the Greens as more of the enemy than the coalition, it doesn't feel likely that we could get that kind of solidarity between the parties.
Not sure they could put the CPRS behind them.
Oh, my God. I mean, I saw someone reference the CPRS on Twitter just this morning, so it doesn't feel likely.
There's also possibly some lessons for the Biden campaign coming out of France, who Biden also up against an existential threat, it seems, that if Trump wins, that perhaps that might be the last election.
I think the US might be a lost cause. Let's take our little French and UK sort of minor victories and enjoy those and not think about the US for a few days. I mean, I think Biden has made some weird comments in the last few days about, you know, only the Lord Almighty could remove me from this election. And it's like, well, maybe he will.
Thoughts and prayers.
Thoughts and prayers. Yeah, I saw a very interesting take in, I think it was New York Magazine, actually, though, suggesting a writer saying, as a socialist, I want Kamala Harris, which seemed like a sort of strange take from a socialist, but sort of putting forward all these reasons why, like, it is really important that they all get behind a candidate that can win. When it's Trump, it's just so important that the far left can get behind a centrist candidate if they have to, and the centrists or the centre left can get behind a far left candidate if they have to. Like, it is just too important with Trump as the opposition.
Yes, well, I guess we'll know the answer in a few months' time, I suppose. But
I'm glad I'm not over there. I considered going over there because I was freelance at the moment, but I am so glad I'm not there.
Aren't we all? But speaking of the far right and so on, another topic that's come to prominence, especially in the last 9 months, is the subject of anti-Semitism. How do you think the Australian polity has responded to this issue?
Well, for a second, I thought you were about to say, how has the Australian responded to this? I was going to say, quite hysterically. Yeah, I mean, there has been a rise in both Islamophobia and anti-Semitism over the last 6 months, 9 months. And I think that is important to acknowledge, but it is fascinating the way in which one of the major parties in particular, but kind of both, have treated the rise in anti-Semitism as if it's the only thing that matters. Sort of any suggestion that any inquiry into anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, or that if they're putting forward one into anti-Semitism, that it should also look into Islamophobia, is shouted down quite hysterically. I think in some ways the sort of anti-Semitism charge has been blown out of proportion, and certainly there has been plenty of anti-Semitism, but in terms of things like the chant from the river to the sea being labelled anti-Semitism. And, you know, to suggest someone like Fatima Payman has been anti-Semitic, I have seen comments to that effect. You know, that is just ludicrous, and it sort of makes a mockery of what anti-Semitism is when you treat like the sight of a Palestinian flag lapel pin as anti-Semitism. So I think, yeah, like much of the world, our polity has sort of lost its mind over this a little bit. But of course, there is also anti-Semitism. There has been for years, and it's interesting to me that, you know, especially our conservatives didn't particularly seem to care when it was neo-Nazis marching in the streets. But now that it is tens of thousands of people marching for Palestinian liberation, suddenly anti-Semitism is the most urgent issue facing our nation.
Rachel, in late 2022, after the shootings at Williambilla, you wrote that now is the time to talk about right-wing extremism and those who fuel it. Do you think that that conversation was adequate?
God, I did write that. That was a very, and yes, I agree with that point. I don't think we did talk about it as per usual. It was like, now is not the time. You know, it's like after a bushfire, it's not the time to talk about climate change. And after a shooting, you know, that had many complex motivations, people didn't want to grapple with far-right extremism. They never want to grapple with the fact that, you know, intelligence agencies are saying this is one of the largest threats. Yeah, it seems that you can't even use the words like right-wing terrorism, even when that is a very serious issue. You know, a lot of these incidents and things we see inspired by groups online are complex, and, you know, often people want to talk about mental health, but we're not necessarily talking about this rising disenfranchisement and this rising grievance that is driving people to the right. And, you know, I think that is also what we've just seen in France with this massive uprising of Le Pen's party. You know, this is a threat, and it is in part driven by the fact that people are suffering and people are struggling. And yeah, I'd say in Australia, we're also not doing a great job of addressing that.
Rachel, at the top of the show, I referred to you as one of our most astute political observers. I don't mean to like turn that into an insult, but you could be a lot less astute and that label would still hold. What do you think's wrong with political commentary in Australia today?
Many things. I think based on what we've seen over the last few days with Fatima Payman and the Labor backgrounding is that it seems too many political commentators are too close to power and too happy to run stories that are either based on anonymous sources and just something that often the party of government wants out there, or, you know, drops and leaks. And yeah, I think a little bit of distance from these people and a little bit of consideration of why they might be dropping you a piece of information and not blindly running it would go a long way for some of our commentators, and perhaps lead to a little bit less groupthink as well. I think there's a bit of groupthink in the press gallery, and, you know, in the last week I've twice pulled up a bunch of headlines that are basically saying the same thing, and you've got to wonder where that's coming from.
Well, Rachel, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us. If people want to find you on x.com, you are at Rachel R. Withers. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Andy, that's our show. But before we go, we've got a little thing that we need to say.
We do, Cam. We need to thank listeners very much for their support.
Thank you so much for all of your support during the Radiothon. We doubled our target, which we have discussed in years previous, sets expectations. So we could have cooled off on that a little bit, but thank you anyway. It all supports community radio, and I guess that's what counts.
And our slabs of beer.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Is this live?
Well, Andy, that's the show. We'll be back next week. Thank you to everyone who donated. We really do appreciate it. It's community radio is more important than ever. Don't know if you noticed, but the mainstream media, thumbs down. Keep it up. And we'll catch you next week with more anti-fascist news and views.
We will. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks so much for supporting us and the station.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Everybody lives in the sun, and nobody cares, so let's have fun. I got no problems, got no walls, and you don't need your brain no more. No, Australia goes in once again. We must remember all our friends, and to make sure all win, that we support the CIA. We got no problems, got no walls, and you don't need your brain no more. No, sir. Hang your watching on the line. It's okay, the weather's fine. Your habit goes out, don't commit no crime. He always gets to work on time. We got no problems, got no walls, and you don't need your brain no more. No, sir. You know you don't need one, and you never had one. So come on, let's have fun.
Stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
Hi, it's Nasser Mashni from Palestine Remembered, Australia's only dedicated show on Palestine. Join me every Saturday morning at 9:30 and very importantly, get along to our rallies. Sunday, 12 o'clock, State Library. Join us.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
Jolt Sonic Arts invites NDIS participants to take part in various workshops through our Sound and Arts Access program. This program offers workshop studios covering diverse artistic disciplines for individuals supported by the National Disability Insurance Scheme who are interested in pursuing professional careers in the arts. For more information, please contact Annalee at enquiries@joltarts.org. We look forward to hearing from you. Jolt Sonic Arts is a 3CR supporter.